What would happen if a gorilla, raised like a brother, met you after 20 years? Would he remember you? At the end of this video, you'll discover a moment that will leave you speechless when Tanny confronts her past and her deepest bond. And there's a hidden magic word that could win you a special prize. Keep watching to uncover it. Before we dive into the story, I want to announce something special. During this video, I'll tell you a magic word. If you comment with that word, you'll enter our contest to win exclusive prizes every week. Stay with us and look for the hidden word. Tanny had been raised alongside several gorillas, and her connection with one of them was truly extraordinary. However, when she left, she assumed he would completely forget her. She had been advised never to see him again. After many years, she was waiting to see how he would react when he saw her. Tanny, Aspen, and her father Damien were eager to reunite with the animals they had once loved so deeply. They navigated on a boat until they spotted the gorillas just a short distance from the shore. They were eager to get off and greet the gorillas, but had been warned not to get too close. These animals had lived freely for years and might not appreciate their presence, but Tanny did not agree with this. In her heart, she hoped they still had the same wonderful memories she had with them. Were they family, or were they? These gorillas had built families in the wild, families that had never been in captivity. Getting too close was risky, that's what everyone said, but Tanny wasn't listening. As they traveled down the river, they saw heads peeking out from the bushes. But is Tanny right to ignore the advice of experts? Is it right to take risks to follow your heart? Or should you always listen to reason?
Hi there. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe to our channel. It's completely free and takes just a second, but it means the world to us. Your support is the reason we can keep bringing you incredible stories every day.
What would you have done in her place? Let us know in the comments. The gorillas were watching them closely. Tanny recognized the gorilla she had raised, even though he had changed a lot. She instantly recognized him among the group. The boat stopped, and despite her father's and their guide's warnings, she jumped out. The gorilla approached. Djalta had once been a little baby she held in her arms. Now he towered over her. He stood on his hind legs and walked straight towards Tanny. There was no way anyone could stop the gorilla now. No one could get in the way. If something happened, Tanny was on her own. Djalta approached and then suddenly grabbed Tanny by the arm. Her father wanted to run forward, but he knew it could make things much worse if he scared the gorilla. Was this how it would end? Is it possible for such a strong bond between different species to be forgotten? Or perhaps, like us, animals have memories that never fade? Tanny had spent her life loving gorillas. Would one of them hurt her now? She couldn't believe that her childhood best friend could ever harm her, but it really seemed like he was about to. Was their friendship over? The unusual bond between Tanny and Djalta had begun as a result of her father Damien's mission to save animals, and to do so, he founded the Aspen Foundation. They worked hard to save animals, especially gorillas, and return them to the wild. They also owned Howlett Zoo in Canterbury. When animals could not be rehabilitated and returned to nature, they were cared for at the zoo. It is fair to say that Tanny and her siblings had an incredibly magical childhood. They spent their entire childhood at the zoo, forming close bonds with the animals. Tanny was just over a year old when Bims the gorilla arrived at the zoo for the first time. He was injured, and his family had been killed by poachers. He needed to be cared for. Damien and his team took on this responsibility. Tanny and her siblings were always roaming around the zoo, and soon they were around Bims too. It was as if he was one of their playmates. As Tanny grew, she often played inside the gorilla enclosure, making sure Bims never felt alone. It was so much fun to have a gorilla as a playmate. They didn't know it could get even better. One day when Damien picked Tanny up from school, he told her there was a big surprise waiting for her at home. The surprise was indeed big, in the form of a huge baby gorilla. Djalta was an orphan who couldn't survive in the wild alone. When his mother was killed, he was still very small. He needed someone to take care of him and feed him. He couldn't just be put in a pen at the zoo. Gorillas are social animals and needed to transmit that kind of family feeling to the young infant. He needed to be nurtured and loved, and now Tanny was old enough to help with that. She made sure the gorilla ate his fill and carried him when he was scared. She helped him grow, but of course, her unusual little brother would grow much faster than any human sibling. It wasn't long before he couldn't live in their home anymore. A gorilla is not exactly a pet. But is it right to raise a wild animal as if it were a family member, knowing that one day it must be released? Is it an act of love or selfishness? What do you think? It was time for Djalta to move to the zoo. They didn't want him to be alone, and he wouldn't be. There was another gorilla, Bims, waiting to welcome Djalta into their enclosure. They had to be careful though. Bims was much larger than Djalta, and if he didn't want to be friends, he could seriously hurt the younger male. They allowed the two gorillas to see each other through a gate first. The two touched each other's faces and tried to play. Bims showed surprising gentleness, and it didn't take long before the experts felt ready to allow the two to be together. Their meeting couldn't have gone better. The two became instant friends. They both still adored Tanny, and it wasn't long before she was allowed to play with them again. They never felt jealous and were incredibly affectionate towards the girl. However, it wouldn't be easy to convince the public that their friendship was safe. Tanny was used to entering the gorilla enclosure whenever she wanted, and spending time with the monkeys was nothing unusual for her. So she didn't even consider altering this habit when a team of photographers came to visit the zoo. They probably thought the world would love to see the special bond. But it didn't go that way. Instead, the public was furious that Tanny, or any other child, was allowed to interact with the gorillas without safety measures. The public reaction was so negative that the zoo received a warning. If they did not implement safety measures, they would be closed. Suddenly, Tanny was no longer allowed to touch her two best friends, Djalta and Bims. She could only see them through the glass of their enclosure. She was old enough to understand that the order did not come from her father, but she was still too young to know that people were worried for her safety. The gorillas didn't understand this either. They wanted to play with their friend and were sad when they were told they could not. The reaction was heartbreaking on both sides. Have you ever felt the pain of separating from someone or something you loved deeply? This is the time to share your story in the comments. Every share creates a stronger bond with our community. Every day, Tanny came to the zoo straight from school. She would sit on the step by the glass, and as soon as the two gorillas saw her, they rushed towards her, only to be stopped by the glass. Djalta would whine softly, and Tanny would place her hand on the glass. Djalta put his hand in the same spot on his side of the glass, desperately wanting to touch her. It was sad, but her safety wasn't the only reason she had to start limiting her interactions with the gorillas. It was time to prepare them for life in the wild. They were big enough and strong enough to go back home. They needed to get used to having only each other and other gorillas around. So humans began to limit all interactions with them from that point on. As sweet as they were at the zoo, they would need to toughen up for a life in the wild. A few months later, They completed the training the gorillas would need to survive in the jungle. And if you are curious to discover more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Subscribers will receive exclusive content and behind-the-scenes insight into the incredible connections between man and nature. Don't miss the chance to be part of our community. Damien and his colleagues had been training them since the moment they came to them. The whole purpose of the foundation was to save those animals and release them if possible. And that was what was about to happen. Now, regardless of how Tansy felt, it took a few months, but they were finally ready to begin their journey back to Gabon. They found a sanctuary where the gorillas would be safe, but at the same time could roam free. This would be the last time the family would see them for a long time. Tansy was able to hug both Djalta and Bims before they were given something to relax them for their journey. The gorillas were excited to reach her. They rested their heads on hers and enjoyed the hug for as long as they could. The magic word of the day is family. Write it in the comments, and you'll participate in our weekly contest to win unique prizes. There was a unique connection between the girl and the animals, a bond that would now be divided by continents. Tansy watched as the gorillas were placed in cages and loaded onto the truck. This would be the first step of their journey back to Africa. This was what everyone was working for. They wanted the gorillas to live free. However, it was bittersweet for Tansy. It felt like she was saying goodbye to family members who she might never see again. Years passed, and Damien went to Africa once to check on them. The big news was that they were doing incredibly well. The two gorillas they had helped save and raise had joined a family group. They were living as they should. Seeing them in the wild, surrounded by other gorillas, made it all worthwhile, even the pain of saying goodbye. They were home in Africa, but that didn't mean they were forgotten. In fact, Tansy often thought of her old playmates. It had been over a decade since they returned to Africa, and apparently, they had become completely wild gorillas in that time. They had grown nervous around humans and did not want to interact with people again, so Tansy was told she should never try to meet them again. She had grown too, and had started working for the foundation just like her father. She had helped save many animals. Then Damien had a health issue, and everything changed. He began planning a trip to Africa as soon as he got back to health, just to make sure he could see it, his favorite place in the world, one more time. For the occasion, they would also try to locate the gorillas. The trip to see Djalta and Bims and their family was long. It was not a journey that any older person could take. If he wanted to see the gorillas one last time, he had better do it soon. That was the plan, but as soon as Tansy heard he was going, she wanted to go too. She needed to see how the two gorillas had turned out. She had helped raise Djalta and wanted to see how he was. She was excited, but surprisingly, no one else was. They warned her not to go. It had been almost 20 years since she last saw the gorillas. They were much larger and completely different. It would only disappoint her to see them. They wouldn't recognize her, and it would ruin her memories of the monkeys. However, Tansy ignored what anyone else said. She was determined not to let her father go alone. She wanted to witness it herself. Damien was the only one who understood. He accepted that she could go. It would bring her peace to see them in their natural habitat. It didn't matter what happened beyond that. Soon they were on their way. The first part of the journey involved flying to Gabon, but there were no roads or airports near the forest where the gorillas lived. To get there, they would have to travel by off-road vehicle to reach an operational base, where they would stay for a few days. This way, they could search for Djalta's family more than once if they didn't find them right away. But they couldn't just venture into that part of the forest. Instead, they would take a small boat and travel along the river. Before they left in the morning, the guides responsible for the sanctuary spoke to them. They seemed stern when they said they couldn't just approach the gorillas right away. The guides would watch them, and only when they decided the gorillas were calm could they approach. Under no circumstances were they allowed to touch or interact with the gorillas. They might have known them in the past, but now they were wild. Djalta and Bims could no longer be considered tame. No more. They were shocked by what they saw on the first day they went looking. As the boat moved along the river, Tanny and Damien saw faces peeking out from the trees. The gorillas were watching them. They were just as curious about the intruders searching for them. Tanny couldn't help but hold her breath. The two gorillas she once knew were watching closely. They had changed a lot, but she recognized them immediately. She could cry seeing Djalta and Bims so close, and when Djalta grabbed her with his powerful hands, she felt like bursting into tears. But her tears would be from fear, not happiness. As her knees trembled, about to give way, she looked deep into those familiar eyes and was sure she saw recognition. Then Djalta rested his head against hers, just as he did when they said goodbye the last time. He ran his hand over her head as he once did when she was frightened as a little girl. He gently stroked her arms and kept his head lowered against her. The gorilla was saying goodbye. Then Bims approached too, just like that. Djalta knew his old friend. They had all changed, yet in some way, they recognized that the woman in front of them was the same girl who had played with them a long time ago. Bims used a finger and gently ran it along her face. Damien approached as well. This time the monkeys jumped up and began to cling to him and roll around on him. For some reason, they understood that they could play with him, but they needed to be more cautious with Tanny. Their family eventually joined them, staying on the outskirts of the group. Father and daughter were able to see their natural habitat, but the two gorillas wanted to spend all their time with the humans who were their first family. The guides were shocked. They didn't think the gorillas would return so quickly to being animals that loved humans. It was quite clear that they missed them. They were happy to see Damien, but something in the way they interacted with Tanny showed a true love. At the moment they had to return to the boats, the gorillas softly whined, worried about losing their best friend again. The sight was heartbreaking. The good thing was that they had spent another day with the gorillas. If this story has moved you, share it with at least 3 people you love. It might inspire them, just as it inspired you. This time, as they said goodbye, Tanny knew it could be forever. There were no guarantees she would be able to return one day. The gorillas seemed to sense her pain. They were reluctant to let her go. Bims kept hugging her and holding her. He didn't hold her tightly, always gentle, as always. But he didn't want to let her go. Tanny was crying as she pulled his arms away. Then she stopped in front of Djalta, her first baby. She loved these gorillas as if they were family, but Djalta would always have a special place in her heart. He rested his head on her chest and kissed the top of her head. He softly told her that he loved her, then climbed onto the boat. The gorillas watched them leave. Tanny would forever be grateful for not listening to the people who tried to stop her from leaving. It was an experience she wouldn't trade for anything in the world. She loved the gorillas, and now she knew they still cared for her. It was a special bond that had proven to remain strong through the years and the distance. They were where they belonged, and Tanny would do the same to go back home and save more animals. Did you enjoy this story? Would you ever try to meet a wild animal you knew as a child after so many years of separation? Do you think all animals remember their first family? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, please subscribe to this channel and leave a like. What a beautiful example of friendship between different species. Tanny has shown that true bonds transcend time and distance. Now it's your turn. What's your opinion on this extraordinary friendship? And remember, every comment contributes to a more connected world. Write the magic word of the day, family, in the comments to participate in our contest. But this is not the only extraordinary story we have for you. We assure you, it will be just as exciting, if not more. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss it. Every comment helps us spread awareness about these incredible connections between man and nature. Tell us your opinion. Do you believe animals never forget those who loved them?